तो इन तमाम मज़ाहिब का हम एहतराम करते हैं ताकि हमारे मज़हब, हमारी किताब, हमारे नबी करीम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम के ऊपर कोई उंगली ना उठा सके। जनाब स्पीकर, आज़ादी इजहार के खिलाफ नहीं, लेकिन क्या किसी को ये हक है कि इसकी आड़ में वो किसी के मजहब के खिलाफ बात करे?
Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Anama Pool with you at BTB World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at two very important stories. The first is in reference to a very important day that is going to be observed tomorrow. It is going to be the Yawm-e-Taqaddus Quran Day, which is very important, of course, for the people of not just Pakistan, but the entire Muslim Ummah, and especially after the incidents of the desecration of the Holy Book in Sweden on the occasion of Eid al-Adha, which is again a very important event for the Muslim community. It is, of course, something that has hurt the sentiments of Muslims worldwide and has been talked about in the joint session of the Parliament earlier today as well, in which the Prime Minister of Pakistan has reiterated that this is something that needs to be taken up in the international arena at all platforms, including the United Nations. And it is there that this needs to be emphasized. This is something that has to be stopped, and recommendations need to be given as to how to curb this matter in the future as well, and to prevent any incidents from happening again, which hurt the sentiment of the Muslim population or any other religion for that matter. It is, of course, also important to investigate into what exactly happened and how this was allowed to be carried out, which the Prime Minister has also reiterated that there needs to be a clarification from the Swedish government as well as to why this incident was allowed to take place initially as well, and then moving further, what sort of legal action can now be taken after it has happened. And then again, of course, the resolution that has been passed by the Parliament has also urged the people and has condemned the incident and urged the people to raise their voice against any such action around the world. And so peaceful protests around the country will be observed tomorrow with a lot of scholars and different Muslim brethren shedding light on the sanctity of the Holy Book and, of course, the religion of Islam, especially during Jummah prayers as well. So this is going to be an important day tomorrow, but we're going to take a closer look at what this will mean for future actions that needs to be taken by the Muslim Ummah, and how exactly will this then be prevented. Our second segment is going to be taking a look at the political developments in the country with reference to, of course, an interview that is being much talked about, and that is with the senior leader of the PTI, Mr. Hamid Khan, who was given an interview recently on a private news channel and has spoken about specifically around the issues surrounding the ouster of the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in relation to the Panama Papers case, and has claimed that this decision was taken before the Supreme Court was ever involved in the situation, and that it was a pre-decided matter, and this is what the chain of events apparently point towards. And because of that, then the Supreme Court was basically used to be able to actually execute the plan and make sure that the Prime Minister was ousted. This happened under Article 62(1)(f) of the Constitution, that he was declared dishonest and, of course, unfit to be the Prime Minister of the country, and so disqualified for life, something that the PMLN has consistently objected to and has said that this is something that needs to be changed. The Prime Minister, in the aftermath of this interview, has also reiterated that the matter needs to be fixed, and that the leader of the country, Mr. Nawaz Sharif, is somebody who needs to be respected and his sanctity regained, as this was something that has vindicated his stance. And it's important, of course, to also emphasize on the kind of political implications that were part of such decision making. The interview with Hamid Khan did not point towards exactly what quarters he was referring to where this matter was actually decided, but it's important to note what sort of action can then be taken if this is actually something that is being pointed towards, and what sort of evidence can then be provided for these matters to be investigated further. And then, of course, what does this mean now for the upcoming political involvement of Mr. Nawaz Sharif in Pakistan, and whether or not this disqualification will then be reversed. So we're going to be taking a look at all of that in our next segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farooq Batafi. I've also been joined in the studios by Mr. Osama Khabar Guman, who's law professor at Lums and Advocate High Court of Pakistan. We've been joined online by Barrister Safiullah Qari, who's a political analyst and a legal expert. Thank you very much, Barrister Safiullah, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Let me start with you, Osama. With reference to, of course, what is going on around the world, it is important for us to, of course, emphasize upon the sanctity of any religion. And, of course, the desecration of the holy book of Islam is something that has definitely hurt the sentiments of the people around the world who are, of course, observing this particular religion. Again, this is something that is not restricted to one religion at all, but rather the question of where freedom of expression ends and where you start beginning to hurt the sentiment of a certain community. What exactly do you think is going to be involved in actually making sure that such actions are prevented, and that when such action does take place, there is legal consequence for the matter?
Thank you, Sana, and with permission from Batafi Sahab, who's our expert on religion, he has studied sociology of religion very deeply. So, Sana, I think it's a very complicated matter in one sense, because there appears to be this clash. I don't buy this clash of civilization thesis, but this is one of those values where two different values from East, many religions of East, particularly Islam, and then Western values, modern Western values, and also there's also a historical religious difference. So in that sense, they emphasize on freedom of speech and expression, but on the other hand, our people, for historical and religious reasons, are very touchy about this subject. So there has to be, since the world has become globalized, there has to be some sort of reconciliation, because as it has been pointed out by many people, that even in West, the freedom of speech and expression is not an unlimited freedom, and as it is very frequently pointed about there are certain instances, like for example Holocaust in Germany, and they have their historical and cultural sensitivities. So perhaps there's a need for more recognition and multiculturalism. So we have in Canada, for example, a multiculturalist model. So the West needs to be more cognizant of the sensibilities of a large number of people of this world. And this hostility, because we see, Sana, that for the most of the time, it is some idiot in West desecrate our holy book or holy personalities, but it's the people of Pakistan and mostly of the Muslim countries who suffer.
Right, but where does the onus lie in actually making the West more cognizant of the matter? Is it our job to do so?
I think it's both our job. In a sense, we have terribly failed, and the reasons are more sort of structural, and also our intellectual poverty. So remember, the ruling ideas are the ideas of the ruling class and ruling people, and our people, or let's say more sort of Islamic scholars and Islamic intellectuals, we have unfortunately not emphasized enough on production of quality scholarship. We have not built many quality universities. You name out of 100 top universities, how many universities are there in Muslim countries? So we have lost the battle on the front, on the plane of ideas. So our scholarship has failed, and historically we Muslim societies in modern times, especially in the last 200 years, have failed to protect our sensitivities and also put forward a positive case for an intellectual case. So remember, we have to convince them intellectually. So that is the blame that lies on our part, that we have not done a very good job and an intellectually rigorous job. But on the West, so I don't think it's just a matter. It has more sort of sinister, in one sense, racial undertones and also colonial history. So there are other issues going on in West, for example, the issues of immigration, mass immigration, what globalization has thrown. So this is a boogeyman for lots of these Western countries, for right wings. You see in Germany, in France, Netherlands, in US, the far right is insurgent. So the issue, there are lots of economic difficulties, and the working class, the poor people in those countries are also suffering. So the externalization of blame, which we also see in our societies, that is very convenient. And this issue of, you see many frequent desecrations, so there's an audience for these sort of lunatics in those societies as well. So it's a complex issue. It's not just a religious issue, purely religious issue.
Right, absolutely. And Barrister Safi, I understand that the issue is complex, but I also want to understand that when the Muslim nations talk about justice, or talk about the fact that there needs to be consequence, there needs to be prevention, there needs to be laws that guarantee that the sentiments of a certain population or religion are going to be protected, then how will this complex situation be deconstructed into something that will have legal consequences, and who will then be responsible? Will it then be just an individual or certain community members or the government that needs to take hold of the situation? You can give us a general understanding, but also like it with the particular incident in Sweden.
Right. So to begin with, I think response by the Muslim Ummah this time around was quite strong and well orchestrated. We've seen in the aftermath of this particular incident, and I need to specify that, you know, in the past, whereas we have failed miserably, this time around we have managed to elicit condemnation from various international organizations. The OIC took a strong stance on it, and many national leaders, which include non-Muslims like President Putin, who condemned it. You know, there were condemnations that came out of China. And what we have managed to do this time is, of course, ensure that even the European Union itself criticizes this act. So one thing's for sure, that we have managed to get condemnations. Moving forward, there's only one way to proceed, and I agree with my colleague Khabar Guman Saab, that it is to build up our own capacity. Normally what happens all over the world, so for instance, if we were to look at the issue of the Holocaust, and how did the Jews manage to make it an illegal activity all over the world? How did they manage to turn anything that is said about the Holocaust, anything that is said about this entire incident, as being anti-Semitic? And this was through a great deal of organization. This was done by them interacting with different people. They went, they had talks, they held conventions, they used whatever little resources they had to galvanize people, to educate people, to talk about what an important issue it is. They made museums for it. They continue to fund films. To date, in fact, I think most of the famous Hollywood movies, if I go through the IMDb top 100, at least 20 of them will be about the atrocities of the Holocaust. Why is it that Muslims have been unable to produce any media, any books? So this is what I mean to say, that, you know, once you are well integrated into the academia, once you are well integrated into international organizations, once you have effective diplomacy, you are able to effect proper change. What we are at the moment for the rest of the world are country bumpkins. I was in a conference today, and I learned that Pakistan has managed to send only 34 people to The Hague, which is which is where the International Court of Justice is. Compare that to India, which has managed to send over 700 in the same amount of time. We can clearly see that there's a difference. Why is it that the Indians have managed to send so many more people to The Hague, and then by sending them to the International Court of Justice, gotten them trained, gotten them placed into all sorts of international organizations where those Indians then go and support their country's narrative? And this is not just Pakistan's case. This is the entire Muslim world. I think Pakistan probably sent 34. Saudi Arabia and all of the MENA region would be less than 30 combined. And that's where the real problem lies. Now, in this particular case, what I have read is that the person who burnt the Quran was a former Muslim. He was a Muslim immigrant who had traveled to Sweden. I don't know why he did what he did. Maybe obviously he had converted from Islam and become an atheist. That much is obvious by the act that he has done. And he did so to elicit a response from the governments, trying to once again blame the very culture that he came from. This is the highest form of self-hatred, to blame your own culture, to blame your own religion. And when things like these happen, I really think that we need to take a more logical approach to it. I also remember in the past, and very unfortunately, I remember those times when TLP would have massive protests, and they would burn down Islamabad. They would burn down trees and burn down cars, and they would break different things in shops all across Islamabad. They would loot ATMs. In Pakistan, people use internationally regrettable incidents like these for political point scoring, which is the first thing that should stop, so that people understand that this is not the right audience. The audience is given by the politicians who weaponize such acts for their own political benefit, much like India does so with terrorism, as was mentioned by Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. So I would honestly think that the lesson here is to make ourselves stronger, to build our own capacity, and integrate ourselves with the global economic and legal systems, so that we can effect proper change rather than just calling for condemnations, which will result
absolutely. I understand that point, but Farooq, I wonder, whenever we talk about a stance that perhaps we need to take against such incidents, it also needs us to have a united front, especially when we talk about the different Muslim nations. And I understand that there is a reaction which is perhaps common and does sort of unify us to some extent, but does it do it enough in a way that we can actually have an understanding of the kind of response that is needed, that everyone is in fact on the same page as to what sort of action that needs to be taken and how this particular the issue needs to be curbed?
To answer your question briefly, Sarah, no, it is not possible, right? I cannot speak for the entire Muslim Ummah, right? Every nation has their own priorities. What I can do is, being a Pakistani, I can try to actually reflect Pakistan's mind, right? As a Pakistani, of course, it is very hurtful to see such incidents. And I wanted to just draw your attention to a few things, and I wanted to actually borrow both from Osama and Safi, because both have actually raised interesting points and things that are very close to my heart. And at the start, when Osama actually sought my permission, I thought for a second that he is taking the mickey out of me, because both of these gentlemen are really well-informed, well-educated, well-bred also. But let me, first of all remind you that this Sweden issue is quite interesting. Why is it that these things actually keep on happening there? Remember a gentleman called Geert Wilders, right? This is an extremist politician who actually thrives on the idea of clash of civilizations, right? This is a man who was actually invited to India when Kashmir was re-annexed by India, and at that time nobody was ready to touch India's controlled or occupied, illegally occupied Kashmir with a barge pole. At that time, number of European Union lawmakers actually went there and actually kind of endorsed this state of affairs. He is one of those people. Similarly, India's role is quite interesting, Sana. Even in France, where a Muslim kid was killed, and after that riots broke out at that time. If you go to the hashtags that are very interesting, Paris has fallen, or France has fallen, or France is burning. Every fourth tweet was from an Indian handle that was actually saying that Muslims are not worth being accepted in your country, right? And that was happening at a time when France was literally burning, and those people actually carried BJP's signatures or signs on their Twitter timelines. So there are people who actually want clash of civilizations, so quote unquote, to take place, and they want these nations to keep on fighting, because when Muslims and West fight, when China and West fight, who is going to be the beneficiary? It is going to be India. It is going to be the people who are not being identified as the front line or confronting civilizations. So because of that situation, I think that these pranksters keep on provoking deliberately, and we have to actually try to undermine their techniques. The second thing, what was said earlier by Safi, and that was quite interesting because he referred to Holocaust. There's something very interesting that you have to realize. Why do you think denying Holocaust is frowned upon legally in the West? Because it hurts. Denying something or a crime against humanity of such magnitude, which actually destroyed generations. If you are going to deny that, it is going to actually undermine the sentiments and wound the people who suffered and continue to carry the bad memories of the story, right? With that kind of a state of affairs, even though I used to consider myself a free speech absolutist for quite some time. But then I started paying attention to the Holocaust denial and neo-Nazi phenomenon, and that actually taught me that any speech that is made with the intention to wound, to hurt, and to actually provoke is really bad, and there should be some kind of stance that should be taken. So this is why I believe, while my own point of view about religion is that blasphemy is not possible, because God, all the religious personalities and the Holy Book are beyond a human being's attack. But despite that, I believe that because the intention is bad, because the intention is to provoke and to humiliate, then there should be a stance that should be taken, and I hope that it doesn't stay only among Muslims, but other countries, right from Jewish state to the European states, everyone takes a stance.
Right, absolutely. And that is, of course, something that needs to happen across all religions as well. There's much to talk about this, but we're short on time, so we'll move on to the next segment, which focuses on the political situation of Pakistan, especially with reference to the interview by Hamid Khan, in which there is a discussion around what has happened regarding the ouster of the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. Barrister Safi, let me start with you. The interview talks about how this decision was pre-decided, and it was already something that had been considered and talked about in a place which is beyond the court, and then the court was then used to actually execute the matter. But I want to understand, when we talk about that, does that point towards the actual quarters where then the decision takes place, or the kind of elements that were involved in that decision making, or more towards the fact that the court was not able to go forward with something that was in line with what needed to be done and just acted upon perhaps a pre-decided matter? Who's really more to blame in the matter here? Because it seems that this discussion is pointing more towards the court's decision and the kind of nuances that were involved, but less on the matter if it was pre-decided and who was behind all of that.
I would shirk away from answering this question, Sana, for the simple reason that I was a lawyer in the Panama Leaks case myself. I was at that point of time representing PTI. I had filed the case on behalf of PTI in the Election Commission. The case was subsequently appealed and went to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court took this decision. I attended all the hearings. I, of course, used to meet Hamid Khan Saab at that point of time, who was representing PTI along with several other lawyers, including Baba Rawan and Naeem Bukhari. It's very difficult to say, of course, because I'm a first-hand observer and a witness to everything that was happening, and I, for the life of me, do not know why Hamid Khan Saab said what he did. I remember the court environment; it was quite energized and quite electrical at that point of time, and there were regular hearings. The case went on for quite a while as well. It wasn't like it didn't appear to be a matter in which the decision was pre-decided. It was a full court. All the judges were there. And Hamid Khan Saab in his interview mentioned that one particular judge did not want to be a part of this case, but subsequent to which he was maybe approached and told to be a part of the case, and he therefore did not recuse himself, whereas he wanted to recuse himself. His reason for recusing himself was that he did not want to be a part of a political matter, but he ended up being one. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, once again, it's anyone's guess what really happened, right? But my own guess at that point would be that perhaps he was given assurances by certain quarters and told that they will stand by him no matter what decision he takes. Perhaps there was a certain degree of animosity from certain quarters towards the Nawaz Sharif as well, and the court was conveyed those emotions. But at the same time, I also firmly believe that the court was fully cognizant of its decisions, and that the matter was taken, and the decision was taken keeping in mind all the laws. It's a very detailed verdict, by the way. The Panama Leaks case is not a small case. It's a very big case, and the judges worked very hard on it. You can clearly see by reading it. It doesn't. If you're approached by someone and you're told to give a verdict, they could have given a 1-page or 2-page order. Instead, they decided to delve deep into the history of law to try and figure out how they can give this verdict. And the sheer hard work that you see in the judgment itself reflects that the judgment came with a lot of consensus, and there were, of course, dissenting notes in that judgment as well. I would want to point out that not all judges agreed with it. It was a majority decision. So, but once again, I have tremendous respect for Hamid Khan Saab. He was much closer to the case than I was, and I don't know, Sana, honestly, right now the political situation is such that I feel like people have many interests. I don't know why Hamid Khan Saab did what he did. One thing that we do know for a fact is that he has distanced himself increasingly from PTI, and that is PTI's loss. He was PTI's best lawyer. He was mistreated within PTI. He was ignored for other lawyers who would not be even considered lawyers by other lawyers of good standing. And Imran Khan is, of course, stupid that way for having ignored a luminary of law like Hamid Khan. And but yet, once again, I don't have an answer for this question.
Right, absolutely, and we'll explore more on that. And I believe Osama was shaking his head, so I want to get his response as well. But before that, Barrister Safi, if you could also help me understand. I can understand what you're saying and where you're coming from in terms of the possibility of one to be able to question what Hamid Khan is saying and how truthful that matter actually may be. But what Mr. Hamid Khan also says in the interview is that this is what the chain of events seem to be, or this is what the situation apparently points towards. So he's not even outrightly claiming what he's saying, and so I want to understand then what will be the weightage that is going to be given, the substance of what he's saying, because I understand the media has of course spoken about this a lot, but what then will be the weight of this?
If you recollect the chain of events, Hamid Khan Saab was actually removed as PTI's lawyer in the case. Once again, I was a witness, and I think Hamid Khan Saab's performance, even though he's a phenomenal lawyer, in this particular case, his performance was deemed to be subpar by PTI. Therefore, they removed him.
My question is what the claim that he's made right now, the statements that he's given right now, should that not be questioned further, or should that not be able to have some sort of weightage or substance, or do you think that what he's saying as it is, that the chain of events are pointing towards whatever conclusion, is something that can be taken as it is on face value?
So the law does not have issues that are based on conjectures. If there was solid grounds that Hamid Khan Saab had he presented a clear version of events, told what he saw, where he saw, was willing to stand and give testimony, that would constitute new ground. In a random interview where he believes that a certain event might have taken place would hold no legal value. The judgment, at least for now, would stand as it does. It does, of course, throw a lot of doubt of the general moral principle that the court stands on, and the general veracity of how we were to look upon that court. But that said, that it's only in the court of public opinion, not in a court of law, not in the Supreme Court itself at the moment.
Right, absolutely. Yes, Osama, your take on this.
I have several points of disagreement with what Barrister Safi said. But I think I would rather focus on the larger picture, and in the reply you were trying to get one of the keys, that what is the legal value of this. So I think the more appropriate and more damning confession of a person, there are in fact two judges, one of a high court and one directly who convicted Nawaz Sharif Saab, that is Justice Shaukat Siddiqui Saab, and then remember Judge Arshad Malik. So there's interesting that Hamid Khan Saab is talking about these Panama judges, and there's this one judge who is later on became Chief Justice, Asif Saeed Khosa Saab. He was involved in both of the, first as a member of the Supreme Judicial Council in removing a sitting high court judge who's claiming that how he was manipulated, how his chief justice was manipulated, how the benches were formed. He narrated each and every detail. So what does Supreme Judicial Council and Khosa Saab being one of its members, what do they do? Rather than probing his allegations, very, very serious allegations, which were direct attack on independence of judiciary, rather than probing them, they remove the justice, which is really ridiculous. And then later on, once a confession of a judge himself who convicted Arshad Malik in one of those cases comes along.
Yeah.
And what does Khosa Saab do? And this is again Panama justice. What does he do? He makes the admission of that confession so difficult. He invents these super standards of evidentiary rules that the confession has almost become inadmissible. So what Hamid Khan Saab has said, I think there's nothing extraordinary in it. this is a fact, this is a truth, which is unfortunate, sad reality of Pakistan. In fact, Asif Saeed Khosa Saab's father-in-law, Justice Naseem Hassan Shah, he admitted on a television back in 90s that how he was pressurized, he was one of the justices, into giving death sentence to Bhutto Saab. So there's a sad history of our judges, our justices collaborating with the powerful establishment, and then it is not like anyone who practices law in these courts, in the court of public opinion, in the court of history, people now know that how independent our judiciary is, how they are consistently manipulated. So in that sense, I think there's nothing extraordinary.
Okay.
But what is extraordinary is coming from Hamid Khan Saab, and that too at a time contrary to what Safi Saab was saying. In fact, it is Hamid Khan Saab who has made a re-entry into PTI's camp. Khan Saab has been actively consulting him ever since he got kicked out. And coming from Hamid Khan Saab, who has been practicing law for almost 60 years, and that too PTI's lawyer, and also in that case, and that too at a time when he has good relationships. So I think very courageous admission by Hamid Khan Saab, and people of Pakistan owed it to him to tell the truth, and that puts a burden more on legal community, and also Supreme Court as a whole, because ultimately, remember, it is the question of the credibility of this institution,
right,
that how this institution is again and again used to cut politicians to size and also to undermine our democracy. So in this last decade, 2 prime ministers were removed by Supreme Court, Yusuf Raza Gilani Saab, and the others were not functioned. One prime minister was murdered by this, or it became an accessory in the murder of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, so on and so forth. So I think this is the question, this is one of those fundamental moments that where we, at least the Supreme Court, which only has a moral authority, should re-examine its decisions of laissez-passe starting from 2014, which is like Panama verdict. There's a series of verdicts which appear that they were manipulated on the outside influences, or sometimes judiciary became a willing collaborator. So that have severely undermined the confidence of the public in the judiciary, because there are real consequences for administration of justice. So it is not just an abstract issue, because if people don't believe that the judiciary can deliver justice impartially and without fear or lalage, then only then this system can work. Because remember, Sana, that the judiciary is the only institution which does not have a stick, neither they have a purse.
Right, but what you're pointing towards is that it's a matter of self-reflection. Is that really going to be enough? How is it that just now, of course, I understand what you're saying, that the content may not be extraordinary, and that if this is something that is already there and we know the facts of what the situation was, and if it's such an obvious injustice, then why is it that now this is something that is being talked about and hasn't really been something that comes up? Is there value that people like Hamid Khan are pointing towards these issues, and then now there may be some momentum in from the Supreme Court to make a change in this?
Yes, I think there is, because so remember, there's going to be a very soon change of guard at Supreme Court, which is unfortunate, and that's a topic for another debate, that why this one person Chief Justice comes and he changes the entire system. But I think there's an increasing realization amongst the legal community that loss of like the decisions and constitution has been rewritten in the last 5-7 years, and there needs to be a collective sort of effort, and in a legal sense, that perhaps there is a need for the constitution of a full court, which examines some of these controversial decisions that have had a lasting and profoundly detrimental impact on our politics, on our public life, and has proven to be a disaster. So Supreme Court has a jurisdiction in appropriate cases. Some of these cases, they can be examined by a larger bench of the Supreme Court, and these cases can be revisited, because ultimately I think without revisiting and without a legal reconciliation and with its own past, it will be very, very difficult for judiciary to redeem itself.
Okay, Farooq, there's also the question of timing that people keep referring to, unfortunately, in our political matters. And then, of course, this is hopefully going to be an election year. And then it seems that in about a month and a half, the government will then change. And there is a lot of talk about the return of Mr. Nawaz Sharif, even prior to the discussion of the actual result of the case of Panama, or what Mr. Hamid Khan has said. And all of this is being linked towards a sort of momentum being created for that to actually happen. And so the political motivations or any other sort of factors contributing to the decision, do you think that they have any value in what the situation is, or is it just a very simple case of what the court decided?
Right, Sana. Before actually you asked this question, and had you not asked this question, I was going to compliment you for the insightfulness in the previous question, but then you actually opened it up further, and there is no indication or hinting. It is very open, right? So that compliment is going to stay suspended in the air, but it is meant for you.
Right.
The other compliment is to the innocence of my friend Safi, who seems to be too close to the problem. He actually said the thing himself, but his why has a very simple answer. We have a big problem in this country in confusing roles of individuals, right? Or for that matter, the matter of hats. Hamid Khan is a lawyer, he's a politician, and he's also a writer. When you write books, books are usually, if they are in circulation, they need to be updated every now and then, whenever something very important happens. So what do? You try to distance yourself from the immediate things that you have been doing and share your understanding or assessment with the reader. So this is about the book. Hamid Khan, whether he was pushed out, whether he was snubbed, whether he was liked, unliked, disliked, regardless of that, he has been writing this book for quite some time and updating it also. I read it, there was a time when I was really impressed by him and other people who were part of the lawyers movement. Then I wasn't, because I read this book, and I with due respect, I have read many constitutional histories. So I considered it a weak source. But regardless of that, he has actually tried to put in his book whatever he thought was correct, right? But then there is the aspect of him actually coming on television and then being asked about it, and then making those revelations, and those revelations being taken as a proof of innocence, right? This is your question right now.
Yeah.
My humble summation is that whether it is by any scheme, as you there was this implication of people keep on saying, or whether it was natural, something natural. Truth is truth, right? Remember, there is one very simple fact about Panama Papers. First, the data on which it was based essentially originally was stolen data. Do you think that the Supreme Court of Pakistan, which is not ready to accept leaked audios of judges or other people as any procedural evidence, do you think that that court would have accepted such stolen data for prosecution? I don't think so, right? Initially, that's why there was a reluctance. But then something very interesting happened. And here again, we have to look at two nuances that he's talking about. One, Panama Papers case. The other one, disqualification of Mian Nawaz Sharif. So you have to remember how actually Panama Papers case actually came about. One, do you remember those reports that a judge, Supreme Court Justice actually conveyed a message to Imran Khan? Why are you actually locking down the entire country? Why don't you bring the case to us and we will give you justice? And this is exactly what happened, right? Lockdown was lifted, and after that, that case was taken to the court, and court actually took it up. After that, something very interesting happens. That has never happened, by the way. How many times have you seen creation of something called JIT in such a matter where so many people are actually brought in, intelligence, investigation and all. And then this matter is so hyped. You know, remember whenever the history of this country is written in future and after 50, 60 years, the two tragic aspects and two people who will be a source of shame will be, one, the institution of judiciary, the other one is my institution, media's negative role. Remember what was happening at that time? Anybody who would actually stick their neck out just to point out that Panama Papers, after all, is stolen data and it should not be relied upon, they were shamed on television by their own colleagues, and the entire media industry would immediately blackball them. My lived experience in this channel was, Sana, it was PMLN's government, but every time I tried to say something in support of you know, the former Prime Minister, immediately I would lose voice. You know, in Urdu channel, I lost my program immediately. And then after that, I started mending, so I will appear again. So this is the level of policing that was going on. JIT, and then amazingly, a trial court is actually conducting trial, and at that time you actually fix or appoint a supervisory judge. When does this happen, Sana? Did it happen in the past? I don't think so, right? These are amazing stories. And after that also, the kind of verdict that came out could not essentially disqualify Mian Nawaz Sharif. So what happened then? Now comes the second matter, and that is of disqualification of Mian Nawaz Sharif. There was another reason. Again, Don League's other aspects are important, but Don League's not that much. Other things, you know, the later interviews as well. Somehow the state immediately thinks that a wounded you know, lion or PM can be dangerous to the state itself, right? And this has happened even now when Imran Khan was actually feeling that he's about to lose power and he was trying to attack everybody. At that time, this whole charade of disqualification of Mian Nawaz Sharif came. Afterwards, we heard a judge actually conceding that he was pressured into giving that verdict. So with that kind of story, Sana, I think that if anybody thinks that our judiciary has given us any moment to be proud of its performance, I think they are mistaken. And I think that Hamid Khan, whatever the reasons why he has said whatever he has said, he has pointed out truth.
Okay. Okay. Barrister Safi, very quickly, your take also on the merits of the case, regardless of what Mr. Hamid Khan has said, and then the possibility of the reversal of the disqualification of Mr. Nawaz Sharif.
I am of the opinion, once again, as I said earlier, that the case was, in my opinion, done purely on merits. There are lacunas. There are, of course, certain issues that still need to be addressed. Those are matters that connect to Chaudhry Sugar Mill's case. There are connected cases that can, if verdicts come out, if decisions come out on those, will have an impact on the Panama Leaks case itself. But the Panama Leaks case was done with a lot of care. There was a massive JIT, as was mentioned by Farooq Saab, that was set up. That JIT interviewed hundreds of people. There is not the evidence of one or two people. There is the evidence of hundreds of companies, hundreds of people from all departments of Pakistan, FIA, SECP, IB, everyone came and they gave their evidence. I have myself seen that the 10 volumes of those evidence. The sheer volume of evidence is damning. The fact that you know for a fact that there was ill-gotten money. Now, one could of course continue to discuss matters along of where the data came from, whether the data was submitted through proper channels or not. There are issues. I'm not going to deny that that every single procedure was followed, and many a times procedures are not followed in the courts. But in that particular case, there was a great deal of evidence and a great deal of care that was taken. And once again, I want to reiterate that this was a full court judgment. This was not the judgment of one judge. We keep talking about how judiciary has been misused, used by people, previous cases. Of course, the judiciary has played a negative role. There is no denying that. I am not going to stand here and defend the judiciary's past mistakes and guilts, and I'm not even going to do so in the case of Panama Leaks. But what I am saying is that if you were to read the verdict, it is difficult to point out where the verdict erred. And even for lawyers and judges who would want to put it up for review, they would have a very difficult time if they were to go through all the evidence that was presented. And the unfortunate thing is that to date, many people who are connected with the Panama Leaks case, I'm not, once again, because I'm a lawyer in some of those cases, I'm not at liberty to talk about all of them. This one case ended up giving me several other cases, and some of the matters are presently sub judice. So until the sub judice matters are resolved, this case isn't going to go anywhere.
Right,
Now, as far as the reversal of disqualification
want to
is
add
concerned,
something
that-
since we're short on time? Yes.
I think we need to move forward, and since election is coming up, no politician should be denied to have a fair field, and I think it's as urgently Supreme Court, perhaps the government should file a review, or Supreme Court should urgently, and I think there's still time for some of the retiring justices to save the legacy. And there's no harm, there's no shame in correcting historical mistakes with real consequences. So I think there's urgent need that the next coming election we should look forward and have a free and fair election where no politician is eliminated through legal or / of constitutional hitches. So that is my hope, and that is what I would
Right,
urge.
absolutely, Farooq. I will not lose what you're pointing towards, and your cough is not is there. Of course, what is it that you want to say?
Yeah, I know you're pressed for time. So, but when it comes to judiciary, I'm going to say only 3 words:
Okay.
abandon
All
all
hope. I know these words by heart now, unfortunately. But thank you very much, Mr. Sama and Ambassador Safi, for joining us and being a part of the show, and Farooq for always being part of the debate as well. That's all that we have from the show. See you tomorrow.